I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: has the West lost its ability to deal with suffering and tragedy? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because over the past week or so in my country, there has been one story which has dominated media headlines, wall-to-wall coverage across all of the networks. A young British backpacker named Grace Millane came to our country, and at some point since the beginning of December, her life was taken. She was killed. The last couple of days, her body has been discovered. Initially, it was a missing persons inquiry, and then it became a homicide investigation. A man has been charged with the crime, and as you can imagine, there is a very intense public spotlight now on this issue, and there is a lot of commentary going on and a lot of coverage happening. But I think that coverage and that commentary and that, I guess, what you might call the public outpouring, I think is worth examining, because for me, it suggests that maybe we don't have the tools that we once had to deal with these situations, these truly horrific situations of suffering and grief when we are confronted with them. So one of the first things that got me thinking about this was a couple of nights ago, our Prime Minister got up in one of her nightly public press briefings and she apologised to the family on behalf of the country for the death. And here's what she said: "On behalf of New Zealand, I want to apologise to Grace's family. Your daughter should have been safe here and she wasn't, and I am sorry for that." Now, initially you think, well, that's a very kind gesture, a kind display to extend to the family. But then I began to think about it and I thought to myself, but hold on a minute, what are we apologising for as a nation here exactly? Because what did the nation do? What was the nation responsible here for in this incident? You have a young girl who's doing an overseas experience. She comes to our country. She gets onto Tinder, allegedly, meets the guy there, and then that guy ends up taking her life. But what did the country do in that process that it could have done better to actually stop this from happening? Why is it that this young girl should have been safe in New Zealand like the Prime Minister has promised here? The simple fact is that even people who live here experience every day in this country acts of violence. There are homicides, there are brutalities that go on every day, even for the local people who live there. So it just sort of seems strange. It seems a little bit like an apology that's not quite grounded in reality. And I think it's right for a Prime Minister to respond in these situations, but it seems to me that a more authentically humane response in the situation would be to actually offer solidarity with the family, to recognise the awful, horrific nature of this suffering that has been forced upon them as a family, but then also to extend that hand of practical care and to say, as a Prime Minister, we will do whatever it takes to ease your suffering at this time. Do you need us to bring family members at our expense to this country for your grieving process? Do we need to actually assist you while you are here with the processes and things you need? You know, my office has already made contact with the British authorities to extend whatever courtesy and kindness and practical support we can. To me, that seems like a more genuine humanity. That seems to me like the response that should be happening, rather than an apology where you think, what exactly are we responsible for here in the situation? What could we have done to stop it? And is it really true to say that someone who comes to another country should be guaranteed their safety? That guarantee doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So it just seems like there's something trite here, there's something missing here. Then we have this from Brody Kane, a piece of commentary. "I am grieving because I was Grace. I packed my bags as a 20-something woman and went on an adventure overseas by myself. I made the decision to explore the world. I had the time of my life. I stayed at backpackers. I saw some beautiful parts of the world. I partied. I met boys. I missed flights. I stayed places longer than planned. I travelled with other travellers. It was one of the best times in my life, and I feel very lucky to have been able to do that. So I am grieving because I can imagine how much fun, how much living Grace was doing, how free she would have felt. How dare someone deprive her of that? How dare someone put a stop to that?" And two things struck me about this straight away as soon as I read this opinion column. The first thing that struck me about it, number one, was, isn't it a little bit superficial to suggest that I guess the form of grieving and suffering here is the fact that that Grace can no longer have fun, or that she was deprived of being able to have fun. The real truth here is that this is far more serious than the loss of someone's ability to actually have fun experiences. Her human dignity was violated in the most awful and serious way possible that it could ever be violated. Her life was stolen from her. Her most fundamental and important right, the right to life, was taken from her. No one has the right to do that. That's the real source of why there is sorrow here. Her life has been taken from the world. She has been robbed of something that no one had the right to rob her of. And secondly, the other thing that struck me about this was, why are you inserting yourself into this family's grief, into this family's moment of awful suffering? Why? Like, if I've got 4 daughters, and I imagine myself in the situation, if one of my daughters was a victim of a crime like this, and I read a piece of commentary like this, my first thought would be, what are you talking about? You went overseas, you had a holiday, you had fun, and you came home alive. My daughter didn't. Why are you inserting yourself in this way? Why do we feel the need? And I've seen a lot of this in public commentary and on social media and media commentary, people inserting themselves into this incident, and it sort of has become a norm now. It's really not a healthy or good thing. It lacks humility, I would argue. And it lacks, I think, a proper humanity and care that we should have for the victims and for their family in these situations. Then we have the salacious media stuff. And you just know at times like this is going to be inevitable, but it's still vile when it comes. So, for example, this headline appeared in the media a couple of days ago. I was supposed to meet the man who was charged with killing the backpacker. Now, I don't have any complaint for the young woman who the story is about. It's about the media who have the responsibility to run or not run certain stories. The outlets who chose, and several of them did, chose to run the story. What is the point of this story? This young lady was, presumably it's on Tinder again, had made a connection with this guy on this dating app, but then she couldn't follow through on it. And it's around that time that he meets up with Grace Mullane. What is the point of this story? It seems the only reason this story exists and is in the public space is because of the salacious element to it. This woman was going to meet the killer. Who else was going to meet the killer? And it's only there, it seems, to get clicks. There's no public interest in this. This doesn't assist the family. This doesn't assist the community. This doesn't help to bring justice. Then we had this one. Grace Mullane joins list of women tourists killed in New Zealand while travelling. In other tourist killings in New Zealand, similar stories have played out, all of them at the hands of men, and at least one case remains unsolved. Now, when you read that headline, initially you think, what the heck, New Zealand's got a problem with tourist killings. But then you read the story and you realise that this is just the media ginning up salacious, clickable headlines for the sake of getting clicks. Because when you read the story, you discover that first crime, it's talking about 6 different killings of tourists that have happened in New Zealand. And when you read the story, you discover that the first killing, the first crime, was committed in 1969. And the latest one, of course, is at the end of 2018. So a span of 50 years, these 6 crimes, or these 6 killings have taken place. So on average, 1 every 10 years. Now, 1 is 1 too many. But all of a sudden you realise, oh, hold on a minute, it's not like in the last 6 months or the last 2 years. This is over a very, very lengthy period of time. And not only that, but one of the killings, there's very much a focus on gender around this story, and definitely in this particular article here. But one of the killings actually involved Heidi Parkinen and her fiancé, Sven Hoagland. So it was a male who was killed as well at the hands of their male killer. And then on top of this, there is the public commentary which seems to be disconnected from reality, or which wants us to ignore certain realities, usually for ideological reasons. So let me give you a couple of examples. One was this op-ed piece that appeared. Tinder is not the problem, violent men are the problem, because it's alleged that Grace Mullane met her killer on Tinder. She arrived in New Zealand, met him via the Tinder app, and then awfully her life was taken from her by this man, this young man, that she met on the Tinder app. And yes, the violent man is the perpetrator of this crime. He's the one who did the killing. Tinder didn't kill her. But surely if there are important lessons about prudence that we can learn from this, and we've known this for a very long time, that the online space is very fraught in this regard, that people have the ability to actually hide their true character, their true identity, their true motivations very, very easily. And so it's really, really important that we are prudent in those spaces. And to have people sort of suggesting that certain discussions are now off limits, that you're not allowed to talk about that because, of course, you're accused of victim blaming if you want to have those conversations. Not only is that nonsense, it's extremely dangerous. Because we're depriving ourselves and our young people, who need to be well-formed with good wisdom, of the wisdom they need to operate prudently in the world. And if there's something we can learn from this, we should learn from it. It doesn't mean that we're blaming the victim here. It doesn't mean that her crime is any less, the crime that was visited upon her, the killing was any less egregious, or that her killer somehow has an excuse for what's happened here. Of course not. But if we can learn and we can act with prudence as a result of incidents like this, then we surely owe it to ourselves as a society to actually be prudent, because that's empowerment. We had another commentator who gave a very impassioned speech, and I agree with a lot of what was said in the speech, but then came this interesting statement, and this is a theme that has been recurring a lot in public commentary in the last couple of days. And she said this: every woman should have the freedom to travel without the fear of death and violence. And as soon as I heard that, I thought to myself, what do you mean? That's not possible. There is nowhere in the world where that state of affairs can actually be realized. It's not possible. Everyone who travels, and particularly if you talk about global travel to other parts of the world, should be aware of the fact that there is danger that exists in the world because evil exists in the world. Even if we somehow manage to achieve a level of societal virtue that we've never seen in our history ever before as human beings, we will still not rid the world of evil. Evil will still exist. The excesses of human nature will still be a risk. There will still be predatory people who do predatory things, and so it is absolutely prudent to recognize that fact and to operate in the world with prudence as a result of that truth. Not to try and suggest that there is somehow a utopia out there that either exists or that we can attain somehow. This utopianist idealism is not good. It's not healthy. I understand the motivation. The motivation is good. The desire to see a more virtuous society, that's a whole other story, because I don't think we actually understand what that would actually mean. We seem to want some virtues but not others, and that's not really how virtue works in a society. But the desire, the idealism to want to see a better world, that is a good thing. But we mustn't ever allow that idealism to allow us to fall into a state of embracing illusional fantasies about what the world is and what's actually achievable and what's not. I have a male friend of mine, I was actually just talking to him a couple of days ago, and he has business dealings in Mexico. And we were talking about one of his recent trips to Mexico for an extended period of weeks he was there. And he talked about the fact that there are just rules that you have to follow in Mexico that you don't have to follow in other parts of the world. There are rules that you have to follow in Mexico that he does not have to follow while he's here in New Zealand, and he has to follow those rules for his own safety, because otherwise his life would be or could be at serious risk if he didn't follow those rules. He's a male. This is the reality of the world in which we live. No one is guaranteed safe passage. There is no suffering-free world. Which brings me, I guess, to the point of why is it? Why is it that we see often this commentary, this response that doesn't quite seem to get as deep as it should, or doesn't quite seem to get things as they really are? Well, I think there's three things that have come together to create a perfect storm in the West. Number one, we don't do death and grieving well anymore at all. We used to see a lot more death, and as a result, and also we were connected to the bigger stories. Religion gave us this. Our Christian heritage gave us this, and it gave us processes for dealing with these things. We don't have those processes anymore in most instances. We've lost touch with them, or we are, dramatically losing touch with them, those who might still have some semblance of them hanging around. But we don't do death and grieving so well. We don't see as much death. We don't like the thought of death. We're very afraid of it. We don't talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. We really should, but we don't. And we don't really do grieving well. The reason why I don't think we do grieving so well is actually the second current of this storm, and that is the fact that we now live in a very superficial culture. And the funny thing is we don't really understand, I think. There's a lot we don't know. We're ignorant about a lot of things now, but we don't realise that we have that ignorance. It's something I began to realise as an adult. I went back and I delved into things that I'd never been taught through the education system that I really should have been taught. I delved into the great Greek philosophers. I delved into the writings of Thomas Aquinas, Dante, the Greek tragedies, the great plays, the pieces of literature, the stuff that really matters, this big patrimony, this big heritage that was handed on. Then all of a sudden, in the modern era, we've just sort of ignorantly stumbled away from it. And so, realising this as an adult, you're like, man, I missed out on so much. I wish I'd known about this younger. But one of the realities of this, what we've missed out on, is that we've become very superficial. And we're not in touch with the big story anymore either. And this is part of the superficiality too. This was the thing that Christianity gave to the West. It grounded us in a big sense of theodicy, of like a divine story that was playing out that we were part of. Now, whether you agree or disagree with that, so you can be an atheist or an agnostic and say, well, I don't know, or I disagree. The point is that when we were situated in that view of the world, it gave us important tools and processes to work through and to deal with and to put things like suffering and death and grief into a context. When confronted with evil, we were able to actually put that into important context. We were able to process. We had processes that we would go through when confronted by these things. And a lot of that's gone. And you think about it now, for most people, what is the deepest sort of stuff that they're encountering or forming themselves with in their life? And it's usually the stuff they're getting from entertainment media now. So the sappy pop song lyrics, which aren't particularly deep, or the stuff they're watching on TV, the dramas, maybe something that features crime, maybe something that features suffering. And that's about it. That's about the extent of it for most people now. And so what happens is when we are confronted in the real world with moments of horrific suffering like this, we don't know how to respond in a way that gets beyond the superficial. And I don't begrudge people for this, because it's not their fault that they haven't been formed well, but that's one of the reasons why. And it's interesting, I've seen a lot of the commentary on social media and even written commentary in papers in the last couple of days about this incident, and it seems to be, it sort of gets halfway, but doesn't go where as deep as it really should. It's very superficial. It's often you sort of feel like this is something that has come from the mind of someone who listens to Taylor Swift and watches, Mean Girls or whatever it is. I mean, I'm not begrudging those things. They're not necessarily bad things, but I'm saying there's sort of not much more to it. The bigger, deeper depth of reality that is at play here, it just seems to be missing. And then the way people respond often doesn't correspond, I think, with a deeper sense of humanity and what it means to stand in the face of some sort of suffering like this. And the third current that's come together to form this perfect storm is that we now have a public space, a public square, thanks to social media, that is often now just a wall of noise. And everybody feels that they need to comment all the time on everything. One of the things I found so freeing in my life over the last year or so is I've stopped doing this on social media. I've stopped getting on Facebook and on Twitter and just commenting on every little story that's flying around. And often I'm really tempted to do it still, but I stop and I think to myself, no, what am I adding? I'm just adding noise. I still do it from time to time, but only when I think I want to say something a little bit deeper, or I can actually construct my thoughts in a way that seem to be more than just noise. But I used to just add to that noise. I used to just comment on everything. And I've realised now how unhelpful this is, because in an incident like this, what happens? Everyone feels the need to actually be constantly making noise about this. We've lost our ability just to, in the media, report the facts. We've lost our ability to be silent in the face of suffering and evil, just to stand in solidarity and silence without feeling that we need to comment, we need to be involved in this in some way ourselves. There's a lack of humility, often I think associated with social media use. Humility is not one of the priorities, the more committed you become to social media use. So what is the answer? Well, just quickly to wrap things up, one of the most important pieces of wisdom that I was ever given when I experienced probably the first major and very serious moment of grief, suffering, and tragedy in my life. It happened when I was young. And one of the most important pieces of wisdom that I ever got from that experience was someone older and wiser who once said to me, look, Brendan, when you are confronted by this kind of tragedy and suffering, don't feel that you need to actually fill the silence with noise. You don't. Don't insert yourselves into the grief and the suffering and the tragedy of other people. We often feel we have to do that. Just stand in solidarity with those people and love them. Be with them as they journey on this journey of grief and suffering. So if you know the people, extend that helping hand of care. What can I do to ease your suffering? But don't try and lift that burden off their shoulders, because you can't do that anyway. Don't open your mouth and just fill the air with noise, especially if you don't know what to say. If you don't know what to say, don't say anything. You don't have to say anything. Don't start spouting off cliches and Hallmark greeting card type, suffering cliches and sympathy card slogans. Don't do that. Just be with the person in solidarity. Stand in the face of it, in the situation. Offer them your genuine care and humane support. Don't insert yourself into their tragedy. Don't try and own it and make it your own. This lack of humility. Just love those people as they go on this very, very difficult journey. And also ask yourself, what can I learn from this awful moment of suffering? How can I allow this thing to wash over me and actually deepen me in some way and lessen the superficiality in my life? And how can I allow it to cause me to love more, to actually contribute to making the world better? I can't save the world. No one can. We can't ever build a utopia. Evil will always exist in the world. But we can contribute to making a difference in the world and the lives of the people that we connect with throughout the span of our life, however long or short that will be. So what can I do as a result of this awful moment of tragedy and suffering to begin to become better at doing that, at loving more effectively and more authentically? You stand in the face of this awful event. You offer solidarity and you love. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon or Subscribestar. There is a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.